Okay, thank you. Thank you for your patience. Technology is not always my friend, but thank goodness it's great for other people and they can help. The best thing about well, I have some good stuff for you, but I do plan on, before you throw rotten tomatoes at me, that you will be out of here before 5. So, so please keep that in mind. But anyway, see, there we go. We're off to a great start. All right, so just a quick bit about me and why I might be worthy to be standing in front of you and talking to you. I've had 26 years of working with teenagers. That makes me probably certifiable, but that's okay. I started my career back in 1993. I did 5 years as a school teacher in Seattle Public Schools. And the last 2 years, I taught inside King County Juvenile Detention. And it's there that I found my people. So I worked with really behaviorally challenged teenagers pretty much ever since then in one capacity or another. From Seattle, I moved to Las Vegas. I did 6 years in a nonprofit foster care agency. I did cognitive behavioral training with level 3 behaviorally challenged youth. Those are youth who are at the highest levels of discipline and behavioral interventions, youth who really pretty much blew out every foster placement they ever had because they just couldn't maintain. So I worked with them for years, lived with 6 of them for 2 years. I ran a group home for 6 boys that I still have contact with today, so there is hope. 5 years, I was a supervisor. I moved back to Washington State. I took about 3 or 4 years off. I had 3 kids under the age of 5, so decided I I was doing work in other ways. When I re-entered the workforce, I went to, was then DSHS. I was a supervisor for a community facility for juvenile rehabilitation for girls. So that is proof that I'm insane, because I'd work specifically with female offenders, juveniles, and I love every minute of it. So if you ever have questions or challenges or whatever, give me a call if you have a girl in particular who's giving you a rough time. I did the last 7 years as Yakima County Juvenile Court Probation Manager. So that's going to go for about 2 more days. It's my last day is day after tomorrow, and I will go back to DCYF, and I'm now going to be the administrator of the girls group home. So that's where I've been the last 26 odd years and working with teenagers. So I didn't have a really good sense of exactly who was going to be here today. I guess I wanted to know, how much prior law enforcement experience is in the room, how many of you have had the opportunity to work with teenagers and work with kids. By a show of hands, you're working with kids. Awesome. Okay. So there's just a small few of you that need to run now. So, but it's a really special place, and I did really appreciate that I caught the last half or piece of the panel, because they really gave some good stuff on working with adolescents and working with teenagers. And the whole concept of mentoring and relationship is huge. So I just have to put a plug in there today for those of you who are new in working with kids or just going into it. That is, I think, probably your best tool that you'll have is the relationship that you can bring to your work with young people. So I want to spend a little bit of time, not a whole lot, but a little bit of time talking about the adolescent brain because it's fascinating. They used to think that the first year of life was the most, where you experience the highest rate of growth, of brain growth. And in the last, I want to say 15 or so years, you can correct me, or Emily, but about that, there's been a lot more research around the adolescent brain, because it turns out that part of life where you are going from being a child to an adult, the brain is doing a lot of crazy things. So, sounds like a simple word. It's a noun. It describes the period following the onset of puberty, during which a young person develops from a child into an adult. It's an ambiguous period between childhood and adult. It's defined differently amongst different cultures as to kind of the onset and when it ends. But as far as science is concerned, it basically is, the brain is, we do know now, is maturing up to about the mid-20s or so. They've said that it takes longer for males' brains to fully mature than females. I don't totally buy that. Sometimes there's evidence, but either way, it's to your mid-20s. So the brain isn't fully formed. And when it's during this period of not being fully formed, its priorities are completely mixed up, at least according to the adult brain. So you can't really see this, but anyways, the red circle of the pie chart is basically whoever their favorite lyrics, that's what their brain is focusing on, and the blue piece is whatever else is, school, other important things in their life. So you know where most of their brain power is going. So significant adolescent brain characteristics, and I'm sure you've seen this in person, I've just listed out a few of them. Based on this stage of development, teens and young people are more likely to act on impulse. They misread and misinterpret social cues and emotions. They get into accidents of all kinds. They get involved in more fights, whether verbal, physical, all of the above. And most importantly, they are going through a period where they naturally engage in dangerous or risky behavior. And I'm sure you've seen that. That makes sense. And if you haven't done it yourself, I know that I did, but. So they're less likely to think before they act. They are less likely to pause to consider the consequences of their actions. And they are less likely to change their dangerous or inappropriate behavior. So, and there's some quotes if you want it. So I found a really good clip. If you haven't seen The Breakfast Club, you should, because it is a perfect example of adolescent brain development and or the problems with it in action. So I have a short film clip here that you will be able to identify the things that we've just briefed on the adolescent brain. I think I have to do it this way. Okay. Raise your hand if you've never seen The Breakfast Club. Oh my gosh, okay. We know what your homework is for the weekend, so.
You're not fooling anybody, Bender. The next screw that falls out is gonna be you.
Eat.
What was that?
Standing in the way.
Eat my shorts.
You just bought yourself another Saturday, mister.
Crushed.
You just bought one more right there.
Well, I'm free the Saturday after that. Beyond that, I'm gonna have to check my calendar.
Good! Because it's gonna be filled. We'll keep going. You want another one? Say the word. Just say the word. Instead of going to prison, you'll come here. Are you through?
No.
I'm doing society a favor.
So?
That's another one right now. I've got you for the rest of your natural-born life if you don't watch your step. You want another one?
Yes.
You got it. You got another one right there. That's another one, pal.
Cut it out.
You through?
Not even close, bud.
Good. You got one more right there.
You really think I give a shit?
Another. You through?
How many is that?
That's 7, including one when we first came in and you asked Mr. Vernon here whether Barry Manilow knew that he raided his closet.
Now it's 8. You stay out of it.
Excuse me, sir, it's 7.
Shut up, Pee-wee. You're mine, Bender. For 2 months, I got you. I got you.
What can I say? I'm thrilled.
Oh, I'm sure that's exactly what you want these people to believe. You know something, Bender? You want to spend a little more time trying to do something with yourself and a little less time trying to impress people. You might be better off. Right, that's it. I'm going to be right outside those doors. The next time I have to come in here, I'm cracking skulls.
At least he walked away at the end. So that wasn't going anywhere. So it's a great example of what we deal with. I might want to go back if I can. In working with kids. I had heard once that somebody had a metaphor that the teenage brain, oh, that's okay, I'll just move forward. Yeah, okay, thanks. So acting on impulse, yes. Getting into accidents, well, that wasn't necessarily getting involved in fights, yes. Engaging in risky behavior, less likely to think before they act. They are less likely to consider the consequences of their actions or change their dangerous or inappropriate behavior. I'm sure that those of you who have had some experience have seen this firsthand. And super frustrating. That was the other thing I want to bring back to what the panel had said at the very end is, you know, you're dealing with these kids, although now in many places they are carrying weapons. The fist fight seems to be kind of a thing of the past, unfortunately. You know, they can be involved in some really dangerous behavior. And sometimes kids are so good at really finding that sweet spot that they know is just going to absolutely piss you off. And it's like a natural thing for them. It's a skill that they get when they're about, I don't know, 12 or 13, as we can see. So finding that thing that helps you to stay in a neutral space is critical. I know whether you deep breathe or you use, there's all kinds of different mindfulness self-care tips that you can do in the moment to help you not meet him at his level, because we see what happens when we meet him at his level. So thinking about what you saw, we kind of reviewed that. I like memes, so anyways, I don't know if you can see it, but I had two teenage girls, and yes, they pretty much spent their entire time for 3 years, like right here. This is who I lived with, but that's just the way it goes. So, you know, thinking that raising teenagers would be like those goofy old Brady Bunch episodes about curfews, acne, and dating. It's not. It's more like Survivor meets Dateline. So hang in there and don't murder anybody, which I think that's pretty good advice as a general rule. So adolescent brain development leads me into the concept of risk and protective factors. So working in juvenile probation, looking at a youth's risk and protective factors is really critical in what we do. Being a rehabilitative court, rehabilitation, you know, alongside community safety is the key thing that we do, because we'd really like our kids not to come back and not to recidivate or reoffend. So we look at their risk and protective factors, and those are factors that contribute to good or poor outcomes, whichever they may be. Mitigating risk factors can improve outcomes for a person, while interrupting protective factors can increase poor outcomes. That makes sense. So examples of risk factors are things like negative attitudes or beliefs, antisocial friends, a lack of skill, low self-esteem, substance abuse, parents who are involved in the legal system themselves, homelessness, living in high crime neighborhoods, all of which are students on any given day at your schools and on your campus. So protective factors are just basically the opposite. You've got positive attitudes or beliefs. They have conflict resolution skills. They have good mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional health, positive self-esteem, success or regular school attendance, good parenting skills, strong social supports, pro-social activities, and friends. So looking at how making a decision to write a referral on a behavior that happens on your school campus can directly impact risk and protective factors. And I guess that's really the main focus for today. When you go to arrest a young person, some of the things that they have to deal with are interrupting, most importantly, I guess, the protective factors that they have going on in their lives. So I just want to take a moment to talk about how can being arrested interrupt or negatively impact these protective factors for youth. And I'd like to participate. If anybody has an idea, if you interrupt, if a youth has that their family is a protective factor for them, how can arrest impact family? Oh, sorry.
Running over here.
Thank you.
So their family going to be impacted by court dates, so that may impact employment. There's a lot of other considerations too, but that's this one I can think off the top of my head. But
Absolutely.
yeah, just
That's great.
going into time and time again, and yep.
Yeah, being arrested and putting a referral through to the prosecutor's office all of a sudden commits that family, because most of the time the kids can't drive, or they don't drive legally anyways. They have to find their way to the courts for multiple appearances. Court gets set out all the time, and it's very time consuming. And in probation, working with families, we have seen families who have lost employment because of just the sheer number of appearances that their youth has to make. It disrupts family life too in their interpersonal relationships with their family in some ways. Sometimes it's such a, what's the word I want to use? It's such a monumental event that it really can negatively impact the relationships within their families, which all of a sudden, with someone who's had a fairly decent standing within their family, finds themselves, not having that standing anymore, goes into and can impact other areas like their sense of self-esteem and other protective factors. So, being arrested, how does that impact their school?
Well, obviously you have the disruption of the normal, like you have suddenly a student that was in class, all year long is suddenly not there.
Right, absolutely. They end up having to go to court appointments, court appearances, missing days, missing academic concepts and things that they need to build to feel proficient in school. I don't know if this is the right time to say it, but I will say, having been in probation for the last 7 years, I can safely say that I know in Yakima County, every big crime that's happened, that's been committed by a juvenile here, that juvenile starts in truancy court. Every one of them. Not just 98% of them, 100%, every kid that has committed a murder in Yakima County as a juvenile started in truancy court. So that's really telling, I think, in one or two ways. The importance of the school community just can't be understated. And removing a youth from that community itself has such far-reaching implications for their future. I have stories after stories after stories. We had, one kid in particular that always stands out for me. Very, very difficult young man to supervise. Ended up committing a murder here about 2 years ago. And when we were going through our assessment process with him, one of the questions is, what is one of the biggest things that's impacted you so far, that changed your life? And I remember when he was on supervision and he was expelled through the rest of the school year. It was like early too, it was maybe February. He had just gotten back into school from being suspended before. Granted, this kid is gang involved, we know this. He apparently was accused of doing some graffiti on the inside cover of one of his school books, and they expelled him the rest of the year. And less than a year later, he committed a murder. And he recalls being expelled for tagging that book, the inside, it was about this big, not that that matters, as having been the critical turning point for him in his life. He was really excited to finally get back into school, and that didn't work out very well. So interrupting school, which is such a huge protective factor, is a really important piece. So pro-social relationships, whether it's family or friends, is a protective factor. When you make the decision to arrest someone, a youth, it disrupts their friendships. So not only does it take them out of pro-social friendships, or where they may have had good friends that are good influences, but it also puts them in contact with other young people who are struggling themselves and who are often system involved, and don't always have pro-social attitudes and things, whereas they may not have come into contact with these other young people before. Housing. How can arresting a kid impact housing?
The finances associated with legal costs, because usually families not doing all that well financially to start off with.
Thank you. Thank you.
Kind of to add to that too, a lot of our youth kind of help the families out with paying bills. So, I mean, as bad as it sounds, now that's one less person working in the household, which could kind of affect the rest of the family.
Absolutely. That's the reality of a lot of our kids' lives. They have to contribute to the family to keep a roof over their head. I've had many probationers whose families are so frustrated and so upset because this youth is in the middle of their impending, head-on crash, that they lose their housing. Landlords will kick them out from having too much police contact or police presence around their homes. So that can kind of start that path as well. Also with family, a lot of our youth are critical in, if they're not contributing directly financially, they contribute through helping the house and watching their younger siblings so that the parents can work. And that can disrupt that too if they're being pulled out of the home, if they're being detained. So employment, is I think a little more well-known impact of arrest is, then it is more difficult for them to get a job. It's always kind of hard to get your first job anyways. So it's definitely more difficult if you are on probation, which is, I think, unfortunate because oftentimes, at least in our county, we really do support our young people in employment and helping them get jobs. And as a general rule, they end up being really responsible, possibly more so because they know they have someone in their corner who's supporting them and watching over them. And so forth. But it does have a negative impact there. It negatively impacts their self-esteem. I know that some kids like to act up front like they're excited that they've gotten in trouble. It's a badge of honor or what have you. It gives them some cred with their friends. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I've yet to meet a kid who thought it was just a great thing for their life to be involved in the system or in the court system. It just, it helps them outwardly in a survival sense. But otherwise, kids take a pretty tough hit. Activities, so, kids are involved in sports, church groups, chess club, music, other hobbies, disrupts all of those, which also are protective factors that help them navigate their life and provide them some relief from being a teenager and help them kind of get through that time. So lots of different ways that we don't always think about that arrests can impact a young person. I have a few statistics about some other things that we don't think about. I know that our prosecutor came and talked about disparities yesterday. I have a couple of things on disparities. Just facts. One is from the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights, that more black students accounted for 31.6% of all students arrested in the U.S. This is twice the percentage of black student enrollment. So just, there are disparities that come into play there. Another one is for disparate arrest rates, students with disabilities are arrested at 2.9 times the rate of students without, or more than their peers. And in fact, I can't cite the source, but there was research done, this was years ago, looking at the average education level for people in the prison system, and the average education level is 4th grade. So I'm sure that's changed because that's a super old statistic, but It's important nonetheless. This is what I found most interesting. Juvenile arrests correlate with an increased chance of dropping out of high school. So the same study showed students are not choosing on their own to drop out of high school. School policies that it served to isolate and expel disruptive and delinquent students, we call that exclusionary discipline, contribute to dropout rates. And with that, schools that have SROs have higher rates of exclusionary discipline than those without it. So that's an interesting correlation. I know that throughout conversation, I've known a couple of SROs over the years. Schools that have SROs sometimes will lean heavily on SROs to handle their discipline because these kids are trying and they wear you out. And as much as we know the whys that bring you this problematic behavior that cause you challenges every day, the trauma, acting out, it still gets really, really hard. And we're human. We are all fallible and we do our best. At the same time, I have seen that happening where I've seen, referrals have come through on behaviors that probably were best served or better served through school discipline. So I'm going to go out on a limb here, but I would ask that you are aware of that. And that when you see that happening, that you are a good partner with your school and supportive of their own disciplinary practices. Like Amanda had said at the panel, know the discipline practice, know how it works, what are the tiers, what are the levels, how can you support your school to not contribute to the criminalization of adolescent behavior, because really that's what it is. Because again, they're a pain in the neck. That's who they are. They can't help it. Another great metaphor for the teenage brain. It's the part of the brain that's the acceleration. If you look at it like an engine or a car, the accelerator is fully developed. It is pedal to the metal going 90 miles an hour down the interstate when the brake system has yet to be completed. That's the teenage brain. So they're in a really tough spot. And looking at the different consequences that come from court involvement, I guess I would ask also is just that you carefully consider before making that choice or making that referral, not a choice. The behavior is the behavior. So 60% of American colleges consider criminal history as a part of college admissions. That sucks. I mean, a lot of our kids who get arrested, they may not go to college right out of high school, their school has been disrupted or whatever, but at one point they do grow out of this horrible phase that's really, really tough for them to navigate and the adults in their lives, and they want to go to school. And 60% of colleges will consider their criminal history as to whether or not they gain admission. So that's a pretty big barrier. 70% of youth who are arrested and detained reoffend within 2 years. So that also goes back to the risk factors of introducing more antisocial peers into their life where they may not have had them before. While arrest disrupts many of the protective factors that may be present for a youth, it also increases the chance that a youth will go deeper into the court system. So I can tell you in our probation unit, we work very, very hard at how we interact with youth. And so it's called risk-need responsivity. It's a well-known principle in working with people in the prison system or in probation that it's funny, if we evaluate our kids, they come out they have a risk level, a low, moderate, or high risk. And that really dictates the amount of time and type of contact that we have with our kids. Low-risk kids, there's a ton of research that shows if you have too much contact with a low-risk kid, that youth is more likely to reoffend and go deeper into the system. So the best thing to do with that kid is to really, you kind of support and monitor from afar. So we might have one phone call a month with the parent, the school, or someone involved with that youth just to see how they're doing. Most low-risk kids do fine, and they go on and never reoffend. Moderate risk kids need a little more attention, and then high risk kids are the ones that we're really looking at how we can disrupt the behavioral cycle of what's going on with them, whether it's trying to teach them skills. That's a big piece of it. A lot of times our kids just don't have skills. They don't know how to disagree with appropriately, things that we take for granted. They don't know how to have a difficult conversation or disagree. One thing that I work with girls a lot is the difference between assertiveness and aggression, because there's a real difference. They don't know how to be assertive. They know how to be aggressive. They're really good at that. And it's very comfortable for them because those are the waters they swim in. So we sit down and actually have groups about what is the difference between being assertive and advocating for yourself, because that's a really important piece for young people, and just being aggressive. So, if detained, youth often have exposure to other youth who have had much higher risk factors or high-risk individuals, simultaneously weakening potential or current protective factors. So, kind of stated that. So, I don't know if you want a break or there's not a whole lot after this. I hope we'll have some time for some discussion or questions. Again, the point of this is just to think about, the impact that you have from submitting a referral. It sounds like you've talked quite a bit about the impact that you have from when you step on campus, because that cannot be understated. And the whole idea of mentoring and using your relationship is beyond critical. Our youth need this. They need a positive support person, an adult in their life. They're not going to tell you that they need it because they're just not there. The brain's just not there. Their prefrontal cortex is not developed in order for them to be able to think about what's good for them down the road. You don't have to, I also love what somebody had said up here. You don't have to be cool. You don't have to know the music. You just have to be yourself, and you have to really want to show up. You just need to show up. But having that contact with someone, a person in authority even, can undo a lot of even familial and or historical trauma. A lot of our kids have had very negative, if they themselves haven't had negative interactions with law enforcement, their family has. And those stories live. Those stories go from generation to generation and impact how they interact with you and how they see you. You have the opportunity to interrupt that. Being at the right place at the right time and making the time is crucial. I had a young man who was in JR. Actually, he was doing a DOC sentence in JR. He put it this way. He said, just be there. Just be there for us. Just show up, sit down and talk to us. If you see us at the skate park, stop and watch what we do and, give us a smile. You don't have to be anything other than who you are. If you're an orange, don't try to act like an avocado. Because if I take a bite of that avocado and it tastes like an orange, that's weird. And it's very true. You don't have to be anything, special. Just be yourself and be authentic and be there and have the opportunity to mentor. So in conclusion, just going briefly over what we've talked about so far, or I've talked about, is arrests, although sometimes necessary with youth, have potentially far-reaching consequences, and some of them are unintended, like housing. Well, no one's trying to make someone lose their housing, but it can happen. Arrests can impact present protective factors that build in resiliency for youth to weather the difficult time of adolescence, such as schooling, family life, self-esteem, employment, housing, pro-social activities, among others. Disparities do exist in school-based exclusionary discipline and arrests. Remember that your presence impacts students differently depending on their experiences and the experiences of their families. With law enforcement, some schools' reliance on SROs can result in ordinary disciplinary situations escalating into arrests that have potentially long-standing impacts. So I imagine sometimes you might be put into an uncomfortable position, that the school really wants your help, that I ask you that you would stand up and go, this looks more like, albeit really challenging, and I'm feeling for you. But normal adolescent behavior that's better served by school discipline than it is by law enforcement. I would also agree with a comment that the gentleman made. Law enforcement has been tasked so much more to handle things that I think is really not ever intended to be in your purveyance or your AO. And we've watched this nationally, and that's a really tough spot. I would really love to see law enforcement getting back to being law enforcement. But our society continues to change, and your position definition continues to change. Working with kids is really difficult. I'm sure you've got that over the last couple of days. The reason being because it's very, very hard to be anywhere on the spectrum of law enforcement and working with juveniles, because juveniles require social work. And if you don't want to do social work, then don't work with kids, because that's what you have to do. There is nothing black and white about working with kids. You have to be super comfortable, being really creative, being swimming in a sea of gray, because it's just not black and white. So, let's see. I have a break. Do we want to keep going? There's not a whole lot left. Okay, that way you're out. I don't know what time it is, but you're out of here before 5. Like I said, let me keep this right here. Ooh, 4:05. You're going to be out of here way before 5. So, school arrest. This was really hard. I know there's some alternatives, but I'm actually hoping that maybe today you might share some alternatives and things that you've seen or that you've heard or that you've experienced, because, yeah.
I'm going to share a story.
Okay.
I think it's fitting with all this. I mean, I brought it up last year, and Chris is aware of it. I'll try and make it short. I had 4 high school students that broke into the middle school, vandalized, stole a bunch of stuff and whatnot. Over a weekend. We identified them via all the surveillance video footage and whatnot. Identified all 4, talked to all 4, they regretted doing it. But that's where again, the relationship piece. I know who these kids are. I know who their families are. I know they're good kids. And yeah, do they do things that they shouldn't be doing sometimes? Yes.
Right.
So I had 4 felonies pending on all 4. And I spoke to all parents, and the kids, 2 of them cried, please do not, we're sorry, we're this and that. They returned all the property and whatnot. I handed it back to the schools and says, do you guys want to do something with this before I do? Because 2 of them wanted to go to the military. 4 felonies, you're done. You might as well. And how's their life going to be impacted after that? They're going to choose some other direction where instead they can serve our nation in the military.
Right.
So you have to understand these impacts that they can have. And you're in that position to dictate, where they're going to go from. Do I introduce them to the criminal justice system where I know they're out of my control now, and I have no say as to what happens to them at that point in time? But even then, even after I put the ball in the school's court and said, you guys handle it, they started playing, well, high school kept bouncing it back to the middle school. Will it happen in your school? Well, they're your students. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. I'm giving you guys an out, and you guys can't even do anything with this? And that's some of the struggles that I was having.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we managed to find something for them to do, and they volunteered for the track meet for the next 2-3 track meets at home.
Fabulous.
In lieu of these felonies that I know would have a severe impact on their higher education, military, whatever they choose to do in life. So, when you do say that there's sometimes an over-reliance on the SROs to handle the discipline, that was up until the new legislation has changed to where we really can't go hands-on with kids and talk to kids anymore, which is something, in a sense, it's kind of shed some light into this issue that we were having, which is, I think, now they're starting to realize we have to take care of this. The SRO is there as a support staff, but this is our baby now. We have to take care of this.
That is so good to hear.
And, so they're shying away from calling me in. I told them, no, I'm not getting involved. This is school discipline now. The courts aren't going to take this, and they're not filing on anything like this. And even Porter, who was here yesterday, confirmed all this. He says, don't mess with all these assaults and things like that. There's really no room for it in the juvenile court system right now. Give me the guns in school and things of that nature.
Those.
What we're really there for, I mean, to begin with, as far as security-wise, but as far as all that's concerned, it's SROs have a huge impact on what they can and can't do.
Yeah.
And
No,
I just
thank you
wanted
for
to share that with me.
Thank you for that. And I apologize that I forgot to address and put on there the military. My husband's a retired lieutenant colonel. I'm not gonna tell him when I go home. But yeah, that's a huge piece of things too. Wow, what an oversight on my part. But thank you for sharing that. I guess I am indirectly challenging you as a person on the school grounds or in the schools working with kids, having to, I mean, yes, you do have the new statutes and some of the new laws that are coming in that are making it more difficult for law enforcement to get involved with juveniles. At the same time, still, I know you get that pressure, and I'm not. I started as a school teacher. I am not in any way disparaging schools because they too are dealing with much the same things that you are. You know, schools used to teach reading, writing, arithmetic, and now they're having to do social emotional intelligence groups, trauma-informed care, you know, nursing, mental health, all of these things. So they're also navigating kind of what their area is as well. So I just, as far as a plug for that goes. So the things I guess I can talk about as far as alternatives to arrest, and it sounds like you have had some great ideas, and that was a perfect example of, you know, having a school-based behavior stay at school. I was at high school in the 80s, so you can do the math, but I had Saturday school. That's why I love these kids as much, because I kind of was one of these kids. I hated Saturday school. But it kept me in the community of school, and it kept me in contact with the teacher. And luckily, I liked the teachers who did Saturday school were on rotation, and I liked whoever, you know, that teacher was that day. But no kid wants to go to Saturday school. Versus, you know, suspending, expelling, arresting, pulling them out of school, where now no one's watching them. In fact, you know, depending on their situation, you know, kids rely on going to school for food. I don't know how many schools that you're at have weekend backpack programs, because food scarcity is real. You know, but keeping kids within the school system is important. So the things I could really come up with as far as alternatives are diversions. I don't know if everyone knows what a diversion is. Every youth is afforded one diversion or more by law. So most kids on their first arrest, they get a diversion. They never actually end up having to go into the courtroom. They meet with our diversion unit. They sign a contract. They have some tasks to do. They have 6 months to do it. It gets dismissed. Now the problem with that is it still logs this criminal history on their record, but they are not. Then they're not being detained. They're not having to make all these court appearances. They just have some simple tasks and they go about their business, and most of them we never see again. So you have a court-based diversion, and then you have a police-initiated diversion program, which I'm not super familiar with because we don't have them here. So they are a pre-court intervention or strategies that police can apply as an alternative to court processing or the imposition of formal charges in situations involving minor delinquent behavior among low-risk youth. Diversion programs provide police with a corrective response to minor delinquent behavior that does not require formal processing. Such programs are often used primarily for first-time or low-level youth offenders. These types of diversions can be a caution, a restorative caution, or a final warning or reprimand. Police may also pair this with a community referral to address the specific situation, as now they're required to do with, I don't know, you're familiar with the Blake decision, and now you have to give, basically you can possess drugs, and if you're caught with it, the police have to give you up to 2 warnings before they can actually file charges on you. So that is something of a law enforcement diversion. It sounds like what you had done with those 4 would qualify as something like that. Orientation, education of the law and process with youth, sitting down, spending time, talking to them about it, taking some time. I mean, they're going to hear you. Their brain is in a place that they don't have the if-then causative thinking and the future-oriented consequence thinking, but they hear you. more importantly, they remember how you make them feel by the time that you spend with them. I forget what the saying is, but people may not remember what you say to them, but they will always remember how you made them feel. And that works both in the positive and the negative. So that's an important piece to know when going into a school. And that's the same for kids. Support your school disciplinary action, or try to turn the responsibility back to the school for adolescent behaviors that are not higher level offenses or even first time violations. Know your school's discipline policy. Sometimes you have to have hard conversations, and you want to help them because you can see how frustrated they are, and then you know how difficult the kid is. At the same time, think of the consequences that are out there versus what you have, the school might be able to do with them. So there's a really cool thing, Clark County does it, and it's a heavy lift, but it's school-based diversions, which also sounds a little bit like what you had done. I would love to see schools to move towards school-based diversions. This is going to take a lot of effort that's led by community, courts, and law enforcement. It's a combined effort where school-based offenses or criminal behavior are handled in school, like working at the football games. Clark County, for example, had a kid who wrecked their football field, and this particular high school, football was a really big thing. They were successful, they had a good team, and rather than take this kid who was already kind of marginalized out of school, they worked with the sheriff's office, and he was responsible for basically rehabbing the football field, the grass, over months, and it was accepted by the football team. They worked together with him to help him fix the damage that he had done. So he never went through the school system, and he was very successful and went on to graduate and didn't have any more problems. He was one of those youth that was on the edge. It could have gone either way. I'm willing to guess if he went through court, it very well could have gone a more negative way. I would love to see school-based diversions because that keeps the youth in the school community. I know what happens when kids aren't in the school community, and it's tragic. And
what makes you wonder if that individual that defaced the book, graffiti in the corner of the book, if they would have been able to keep him in school,
yeah,
what the outcome would have been.
Who knows?
Just expelling him again.
Yeah, he ended up being tried as an adult, so we know where he is now.
But
I don't know.
If that would have happened, if they wouldn't have expelled him, what would have been the outcome if they would have, instead of handling it that way, handled it differently? Yes, exactly. And that's, it's hard to think about because he murdered another probationer who we were, it was a really hard loss. They're all hard losses, but it was a really tough case and a very hard loss for the community. So yeah, who knows? Schools typically are a community hub for the majority of the community. Schools are where you gather. Schools are where you have meetings. Schools are the centerpiece for so much of what we do. For some people it could be churches, it can be what have you, but the school tends to be kind of the great equalizer in a community. And having it be a place of which you are kicked out of and not embraced or in the fold has really far-reaching consequences. So I guess if I've not said anything today, that would be it. Keep our kids in school, please. So other alternatives, know your community, know if you can make referrals, refer kids to mental health, substance abuse treatment, mentoring. You can mentor every day. You don't have to be special. You just have to be you, like they said before. You just got to give your time, be you. Leadership programs or classes, support groups. If you see a kid on the edge who's maybe, has some graffiti in a book or whatever, and something that might help, maybe I don't know if this is even possible, but making a referral to, if you know of a leadership program or classes in the community that might help support that young person, saying, hey, I'm not going to be putting this referral through.
but this is what I'd like you to do. But knowing your community is going to be really important with that. We're not going to do an activity. So in the end, be aware of the consequences long term. Can you help increase students' protective factors in any way? If you have, it takes 3 minutes to introduce a kid to a skill of how they can better handle a situation. 3 minutes. Hey, let me talk to you. I saw you shoulder check that kid over there. What's going on? Oh, you're having a disagreement. Well, let's talk about that. How can we handle this? Taking the time to increase those protective factors. Asking yourself, is this unnecessary criminalizing of adolescent behavior? Is there something else that can be done to address this behavior? Or what is driving it? Lots of stories around law enforcement who have gone the extra mile when they know a family is really struggling with, again, food scarcity or homelessness or any number of those things that go that extra mile. So thinking about, are there people or are there programs in your community that can help with this kid? Oh, is Issaquah in here? Is there anyone here? Yes. I have a question for you. So the Parent Project, are you familiar with that?
Sorry, what?
Oh, the Parent Project?
No.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I won't keep you afterwards. But from what I understand, the Issaquah Police Department had implemented something called the Parent Project, which is a pretty easy training to go through, and then you hold 10-week classes for parents who are struggling with their youth in their homes for all things, school attendance, all kinds of stuff. Anyways, we're looking at it. So I'm like, if there's someone there from Issaquah, I'd love to talk.
I've never heard it called the Parent Project, but it's like a Friends of Youth program.
Okay.
It's a nonprofit in Issaquah that does stuff like that.
Okay. But there's a YouTube of some Issaquah police officer teaching this to parents. So.
Nate, could you say that again for us so
Sorry.
we can get it on the?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't really want to say it anymore.
You're famous now. Get on the mic.
It's too late.
You're almost done.
It's a program like we do things like hidden in plain sight and stuff like that. It's all resources for parents, but that's part of it. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. So it's, if you have something like that in your community, parents need support. There's not enough time because you'll be here after 5 if I have to talk about parents, so let's not. So I do want to read this quote, potentially a little bit inflammatory, but it's really true. And I blocked out the cuss words. I'm really accustomed to it. That's 26 years of working with kids. I have a terrible mouth. I have a terrible taste in music. All of these side effects. But there was a show on, I don't know if anyone's familiar with John Oliver, has a program on HBO called Last Week Tonight. He just happened to do a piece on school SROs. I will say that the examples that he used were mostly schools from the Midwest and East Coast. Not trying to diss on anybody, but Washington is pretty progressive in a lot of ways. But the quote goes like this, and I do believe this in working with these kids. Kids deserve to be annoying without being arrested, to be sad and angry without being body slammed. They deserve to have tantrums, throw carrots, do science experiments, talk and carve their name into stuff without risking ending up in the back of a police car. They deserve to be curious, to make mistakes, to go a little too far, to be a little too loud, and to basically be an effing kid. And if you don't believe that, I don't know. Maybe we should talk about somewhere else, because that's kids. And that's all I got for you. Thank you. Thanks.